She was late, running across a marble lobby, one heel already scuffed, portfolio case swinging. 30 minutes before the biggest presentation of her life. She lunged for the elevator. The doors opened, and there he was, the man she had walked away from 26 years ago, the man she had spent 17 years of marriage pretending she was over, the man she had convinced herself was just a memory, just nostalgia. Just the kind of feeling young women have before they learn to be practical. He looked at her for one long, still moment. And then he said 5 words. 5 words that unraveled 26 years in 5 seconds. I've been waiting for you to come back. This is not a story about a billionaire. This is not a story about a second chance at love. This is a story about a woman who spent decades being careful, being sensible, being everything the world told her a grown woman should be, and the moment she finally stopped running from the one thing that had always been worth staying for. Stay with us, because somewhere in this story, you are going to recognize yourself. This story carries one truth that took Claire 47 years to learn, and that you deserve to hear today. The life you are meant to live has never been behind a locked door. You simply stopped believing you were allowed to open it. If this story speaks to something you have been quietly carrying, you are not alone, and you are not too late. If this story touched something in you, please like this video, leave a comment below, telling us which moment hit you hardest. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this one. Every like, every comment, every share tells us that these stories matter. And they do. They matter because you matter.
The doors were closing. She lunged anyway. Her portfolio case caught the gap. The elevator groaned. The doors jerked open again. Claire Hartwell stepped inside, breathless. One heel was scuffed from the sprint across the marble lobby. She pressed the button for the 14th floor, smoothed her blazer with one hand, tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear with the other. 30 minutes. She had 30 minutes before the Meridian Group expected her presentation. 30 minutes to convince a room full of strangers to trust her with their $4 million renovation budget. She had done harder things. She reminded herself of that. She had done much harder things. She exhaled slowly. Going up, the voice came from the back corner of the elevator. Low, quiet, familiar, impossibly familiar. Claire's hand froze over her portfolio clasp. She turned, and the air left her body completely. He was taller than she remembered. Or maybe she had simply forgotten how tall he actually was. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. His hair was silver at the temples now, the same dark brown everywhere else. There were lines at the corners of his eyes. A jaw that was still. The most infuriatingly perfect jaw she had ever seen in her life. Grant Calloway, in the flesh. Standing 4 feet away from her, looking directly at her, he took one look. One long, quiet, absolutely still look. And then he said it. I've been waiting for you to come back. Not hello, not how have you been, not what are you doing here after all this time. I've been waiting for you to come back. Claire opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The elevator doors slid shut behind her. She stared at him. He stared back. The elevator hummed upward. The numbers climbed 3, 4, 5, and all she could think was, this is not real. This is not actually happening. People do not step into elevators and find the one person they spent 26 years trying to forget standing in the corner like they had simply been waiting for the doors to open. She started. You look exactly the same, he said. That's not true. The words came out automatically, defensively. Like her mouth was protecting her before her brain caught up, he smiled. That slow, quiet smile. The one she had approximately 11 years trying to forget, and another 15 pretending she had succeeded. No, he agreed. You look better. The elevator chimed. 14th floor. The doors opened. Claire grabbed her portfolio, stepped out, turned around. Grant had not moved toward the door. He was watching her with the same expression she remembered from the last night she had ever seen him. That terrible patient expression she had always misread as indifference. She understood it differently now. Standing here, in this hallway, with her heels scuffed and her hands not entirely steady, it had never been indifference. It had been restraint. I have a meeting, she said. I know, he said. It's with my acquisitions team. The doors slid closed. Claire stood in the hallway of the Callaway Grand Hotel and stared at the closed elevator doors for a full 15 seconds. The marble was cold under her feet, even through her shoes. The air conditioning hummed somewhere above her. A cart rolled distantly down another corridor. Then she said very quietly to absolutely no one, "Oh, no." She found a bathroom off the second floor landing and stood at the sink for 3 minutes, cold water on her wrists, the way her mother taught her. For nerves, for shock, for the moments when your body is moving faster than your mind and you need something physical to slow everything down. God, of all the hotels in all the cities. She looked at herself in the mirror, dark hair, slightly disheveled from the sprint, brown eyes that were doing too much right now, the wine-colored blazer she had pressed the night before because she always pressed things the night before. She was 47 years old. She was a professional. She had a presentation in 22 minutes that represented the largest contract her firm had ever pursued. She was not going to fall apart in a hotel bathroom over a man she had not spoken to in 26 years. She fixed her hair, squared her shoulders, picked up the portfolio, and went to give the best presentation of her career. The presentation went well. That was the infuriating part. Grant was not in the room. Of course he wasn't. Men worth $4.7 billion did not sit in on hotel renovation pitches. He had a team for that. Polished, attentive people who asked sharp questions about sourcing timelines and load-bearing wall assessments. She answered all of them. Clean. Confident. She was good at this. She had gotten very good at this after the divorce, when being good at it was the only thing standing between her and a completely unmoored life. The lead acquisitions director, a trim man named Frederick with excellent posture and an honest handshake, met her eyes when she finished. "Impressive portfolio, Miss Hartwell," he said. "We'll be in touch within the week." She thanked him, gathered her materials, walked back to the elevator, pressed the button. The doors opened immediately. Grant was inside. Of course he was. "Going down?" he asked. She stepped in. The doors closed. They stood in silence for 1 full floor. 2. 3. The elevator smelled faintly of cedar and something else she couldn't name. She stared at the descending numbers. 8. 7. 6. "Did you arrange this meeting?"
Yeah.
she asked. She kept her voice very even. "No," he said. His voice was equally even. "I own 43 hotels. My team briefs me on major contracts. Your firm's name came across my desk last week. I thought it might be coincidence, but you came anyway. I wanted to see if it was you." 5. 4. "It's me," she said. "I know." 3. 2. "I'd like to have dinner with you, Claire." 1. Lobby. The doors opened. She stepped out first, turned to face him. He stepped out too. And they stood there in the marble lobby of his hotel while the world moved around them, completely indifferent to the fact that time had just folded in half. A businessman crossed the floor talking into his phone. A family with too much luggage rolled toward the front desk. A piano played something soft and distant from the bar. He was watching her the way he had always watched her. Like she was a problem he had already solved and was simply waiting for her to catch up. It had always made her feel both completely seen and faintly ridiculous. "I'm 47 years old," she said. "I'm not that girl anymore." "Good," he said. "I'm not interested in that girl." He reached into his jacket pocket, produced a business card, held it out. She took it. She didn't know why. She absolutely should not have taken it. But her hand moved before she decided. His fingers brushed hers for exactly 1 second. Every single one of the 26 years compressed into that 1 second. "Think about it," he said. Then he walked back toward the elevator, back up into his hotel, his empire, his enormously complicated, expensive, infuriating world. Claire stood in the lobby holding his business card. She did not think about it on the drive home. She did not think about it when she unlocked her apartment and fed her cat, a cantankerous orange tabby named Bruiser, who greeted her with exactly the level of affection she deserved, which was to say, very little. She did not think about it when she poured a glass of wine. She thought about it when she sat down on the couch and the glass was halfway to her lips, and she had this sudden, complete, overwhelming memory. Not anything dramatic, nothing you would put in a movie. Just a Tuesday afternoon 26 years ago. Lying on the floor of Grant's tiny graduate apartment, both of them reading, his foot pressed lightly against hers, the whole afternoon gold and still and perfectly, completely ordinary. The most ordinary moment of her life. The one she had thought about, despite herself, more times than she would ever admit to anyone. She set down the wine, she looked at the card. His personal cell number was written on the back, in handwriting she still recognized after 26 years. She hated that she recognized it. She turned the card over, turned it back. Bruiser jumped onto her lap and headbutted her hand with the aggressive affection of a cat who had no interest in emotional subtlety. "Don't look at me like that," she said. He looked at her like that. She put the card face down on the coffee table, went to bed, lay in the dark for 2 hours watching the ceiling, got up, called Donna. It was 11:15 at night. Donna answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said. "How did you I didn't tell you, Claire Marie Hartwell," Donna said. "You walked into a hotel at 9 this morning for the biggest pitch of your career and then went completely silent for 14 hours. Either the meeting went catastrophically or something happened that your brain cannot process." Claire lay back on the couch, stared at the ceiling. "I ran into Grant Calloway," she said. 3 full seconds of silence. "Say that again." "He owns the hotel. He was in the elevator. He asked me to dinner." Another silence. Longer. Then, "Honey." Donna's voice shifted to the careful voice, the one she used when something required enormous precision, when getting it wrong would cost something real. "Start from the beginning," Donna said. "Leave absolutely nothing out." She had told herself a great many things over 26 years. That she had made the right choice. That she had been too young to understand what she was throwing away. That Grant Calloway had almost certainly moved on within 6 months of her leaving and built a fine, full life with someone entirely suitable. Someone who matched his ambition and his drive and all those enormous, unspoken expectations that had lived in every room he entered. She had told herself the feeling she carried was nostalgia, not grief, just nostalgia. The warm, distant feeling you get about a place you used to live, not something you would actually go back to, not something that required action. She had told herself this, especially on the hard nights, the nights when Derek came home distracted and she ate dinner across from someone who was technically present and practically nowhere near her. The nights when she lay awake in their bedroom thinking, "This is fine. This is what adult love looks like. Not every marriage is electric. Electric is for people who are 21 years old, and I am not 21. She had been very convincing. To herself, mostly. Now she sat across from Donna at their usual corner table at the breakfast cafe on Thursday morning. 2 days after the elevator, 2 days of turning that business card face down and then picking it back up. The coffee was good here. The light came in at an angle in the mornings that made everything look warmer than it was. Donna listened with both hands around her cup. Her expression was one Claire knew well. Careful fascination. The specific look of someone who has wanted to say something for years and is choosing her moment with great precision. When Claire finished, Donna set down her coffee. "Okay," she said, "I'm going to say something and you'll want to argue. But I need you to just sit with it first." "That is a terrible opening," Claire said. "You left Grant Calloway because you were scared." "I left Grant Calloway because we were completely incompatible." "You left Grant Calloway," Donna repeated, slowly and clearly, "because loving him scared you more than anything else in your life ever had. And you were 21 years old. And 21-year-olds run from things that scare them." Claire stirred her coffee. "The incompatibility argument," Donna continued, "was something you built afterward, like scaffolding, to make the running make sense. You don't know Claire." Donna's voice was quiet, but it did not move. "I knew you then. I was there. I watched you for 3 years, absolutely luminous, fully yourself in a way I had never seen before or since. And then I watched you talk yourself out of it piece by piece until you had convinced yourself it was a rational decision." She paused. "I always wondered if you would regret it. I don't regret it." The words came too fast. She heard it herself. Donna just looked at her. "I made a life," Claire said, more slowly this time. "A good life. Ashley, my business, all of it. All of which you built yourself," Donna said. "Mostly after Derek checked out emotionally, and you just hadn't acknowledged it yet." She picked up her coffee again. "I am not saying your life is a consolation prize. I am saying you built something real despite a detour. Not because of it." Claire looked out the window at the street. A woman walked past pushing a stroller. A man jogged by in the gray morning air. The ordinary, continuous motion of a Thursday that did not know anything had shifted. "He said he had been waiting for me to come back," she said. "I know. That is not a reasonable thing to say to someone you haven't seen in 26 years. I know." It is manipulative. It is designed to produce exactly the kind of thing that makes you feel things you have been carefully not feeling for a very long time. Claire closed her eyes, opened them. "I am 47 years old, Donna. Yes. That whole sweeping destiny second chance thing that is for younger women, Claire." Donna leaned forward. Her voice was not unkind. It was something more important than kind. It was honest. "Who told you that?" Silence. "Who told you those things expire? that after a certain age you just accept whatever life handed you and stop wanting the things that once made you feel completely alive. Claire's throat did something it had not done in a long time, something tight and complicated. I'm not saying run headfirst into dinner with a billionaire you haven't spoken to in over 2 decades, Donna said. I'm saying the fear that's making you want to argue yourself out of even considering it, that is the same fear you had at 21. And the only question is whether you want to make the same choice again. The Callaway Grand reached out the following Monday. Frederick, the acquisitions director with excellent posture, called her cell at 9:15 in the morning. His voice was warm and professional in equal measure. Hartwell Interiors had been selected. The Meridian Group project. $4.2 million. Start date pending contract review. Congratulations, Miss Hartwell. We look forward to working with you. She sat at her desk after the call and did not move for a long time. She had earned this contract. She knew that with absolute certainty. The numbers had been right. The vision had been right. She had answered every question cleanly and confidently. She had also spent 40 minutes in elevators with the man who owned the entire building. She pulled up her contract review checklist. The professional, systematic part of her brain began moving through scope clauses and timeline benchmarks. The other part of her brain was doing something quieter. She was remembering things. Not dramatic things. Not movie moments. Small ones. The way he used to make coffee, twice as strong as anyone needed, poured into mugs that were slightly too large for a normal hand, and he would push hers across the counter without asking if she wanted any, because he already knew she did. The way he argued, not loudly. He would go very still, the way a river goes still before it drops. Then he would make one point. Clean. Final. Like laying down a card. The way he had looked at her the first time. That architecture lecture. She was there for extra credit. He was an engineering student who had wandered in by accident. He had tilted his head slightly to the left. Said later that he had known immediately. She had laughed. Told him that was a ridiculous thing to say. He agreed. Said it anyway. He always said things anyway. Even when it was not strategic. Grant Calloway had always just said the true thing and let other people decide what to do with it. I was so stupid, she thought. The signs were all there. Every single one. She picked up her phone, stared at his number, put it down, picked it up again. She typed, "This is Claire Hartwell. I understand we will be working together on the Meridian project. I look forward to a professional relationship." She sent it before she could think too much. His reply came 30 seconds later. "Is that all?" She stared at it. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "I will be in Portland Friday. Dinner, not a meeting. No agenda. Just 2 people who used to know each other. Say yes." She stood, walked to the window, looked down at the street. 2 women walked past laughing. A delivery driver balanced 3 boxes against his hip. A couple argued outside the coffee shop across the street, gesturing with paper cups, and then the man reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind the woman's ear. They both laughed. The tension dissolved like sugar in warm water. They walked inside together. I have been so careful for so long, she thought. Careful has not made me happy, it has made me safe. She walked back to her desk, typed, Friday, but I am choosing the restaurant. His reply was immediate. 1 word, good. Ashley called that evening from Florence. Her voice came through warm and slightly grainy, 9 hours ahead, so nearly 2 in the morning there, which meant she had just come in from somewhere wonderful and was too energized to sleep. Mom, you sound weird. I sound exactly like I always sound. You sound like you when you are trying to sound like you always sound, which is different. A pause. The faint sound of Ashley sitting down somewhere, a distant city murmuring behind her. What happened? Claire considered briefly lying. She had never been able to lie to Ashley. I ran into someone I used to know, she said, a long time ago. Before your father. Before Dad. Ashley's voice shifted slightly. How far before Dad? College. Oh, that was a considering sound. A slow one. Someone important? Claire sat on her kitchen counter, the thing she had done since she was a teenager and never managed to stop doing. She looked at Bruiser sitting on the far counter. He looked back at her with his flat, unreadable orange face. Yes, she said. Someone important. And now? I'm having dinner with him Friday. Ashley's silence had a particular quality, the quality of someone working through something they wanted to say very carefully. Finally, Mom, do you remember what you told me when I was going through the thing with Marcus last year? Claire remembered. Marcus, the perfectly nice, perfectly wrong boyfriend Ashley had clung to for 2 years out of habit, and the terror of being alone at 21. I told you that staying somewhere safe was still a choice, Claire said, And choosing it every day does not make it inevitable, Ashley said. You said that. I was talking about you. I know. Her voice was soft. Certain. Go to dinner, Mom. Friday arrived the way important days always arrive. Ordinary in every external way. The alarm went off. Coffee was made. Bruiser knocked a pen off the edge of the desk with the deliberate satisfaction he brought to all his work. The sun came through the kitchen window at its usual angle and lit the countertop in the usual stripe of gold, but something hummed underneath all of it. Claire stood in front of her open closet for 16 minutes. She knew what she was doing. She was not agonizing over a dress, she was agonizing over a choice. The dress was simply where the agonizing had chosen to live in her body. Finally, she put on the deep wine-colored wrap dress. The one Ashley had picked out for Claire's birthday last year and said, with the characteristic bluntness that made her simultaneously exhausting and wonderful, "You look like a person who knows who they are in this." She added her grandmother's simple gold earrings, the ones with the small oval faces, worn smooth from decades of handling, low heels, her good coat. She checked her phone 3 times in the elevator. Lock. Unlock. Lock. She made herself put it in her bag. She did not look at it again until she was parked outside the restaurant. She had chosen a place called Orchard Table. Not fancy, not trying too hard. The kind of restaurant with genuinely good bread and a wine list that didn't require a translator. Enough ambient noise that silence would feel like a choice rather than a failure. She knew the owner. She had renovated the private dining room 3 years ago. She always got the corner table. She arrived 4 minutes early. He was already there. Of course he was. Grant Calloway sat at corner table. Her corner table. He was holding a glass of water and reading something on his phone. His reading glasses were low on his nose. He had not noticed yet. She had 4 seconds. 4 seconds to look at him without him looking back. He had aged the way some men age. Not despite the years, but through them. Like the years had added weight in all the right places. Settled something that had once been restless. He looked like a man who had made some kind of peace with himself. Whether that was deeply attractive or deeply annoying, she could not quite decide. Possibly both. He looked up. The glasses came off in one smooth motion, tucked into his breast pocket. He stood. She had forgotten how that felt. The simple, unremarkable act of a man standing when you walked in, like you were worth standing for. Derek had stopped doing that sometime around year 6, and she had not noticed when it stopped, and that itself probably said something she had been unwilling to hear for a long time. "You came," Grant said. "I said I would. You also said it was going to be professional. And yet here I am in my good dress," she said. "So clearly one of us evolved." He smiled, pulled out her chair. She sat. He sat across from her. They looked at each other across a table for the first time in 26 years. "Well," she said. "Well," he said. The waiter appeared with a breadbasket and the wine list, and the small merciful business of ordering gave them both a minute to settle into the reality of the moment. When the waiter left, Grant said, "I am not going to pretend this is just 2 old friends catching up. I didn't think you would." "Good. Pretending was never something either of us was particularly skilled at." "Speak for yourself," she said. "I got quite good at it." Something moved across his face, quick and contained. She recognized it. She had seen versions of it in the elevator, in the lobby. Not heard exactly. Something more considered than that. Something that had been sitting with itself for a long time. "I know," he said quietly. "I imagine you had to be." She had not expected that. She had prepared herself for something self-congratulatory. Something that would quietly redirect everything back to him. A man who had spent 26 years accumulating enormous power had presumably also gotten very comfortable reframing any situation in his own favor. She had been braced for that. But he just looked at her and said, "I know," and it landed precisely as she had not prepared for. "Tell me about your firm," he said. "Not the portfolio. I've seen the portfolio. Tell me how you built it." So she did. She told him about the first year after the divorce, working out of the second bedroom of a rented apartment, 3 clients, all of them friends of Donna's, charitably employed out of pity. She had accepted that without pride because Ashley needed new textbooks and the electricity bill was due, and pride was a luxury she could not afford in that particular season. She told him about the year everything shifted, the Bellman Project, the spread in the regional design journal, the word of mouth that started small and then wasn't small anymore. She told him about the first time she signed a lease for her own office space, standing in the empty room with the keys in her hand, the way she had cried. Not from sadness, from something much harder to name, the feeling of a thing being entirely and completely hers. Built by her, belonging to no one else. He listened the way he used to listen, completely, like she was the only sound in the room worth hearing. "You are proud of it," he said when she finished. "I built it myself," she said. "Yes, you always were going to," he said it simply. A fact he had apparently known for a long time and was only now saying out loud. "You were the most capable person in any room you walked into. You just didn't believe it yet." "I believe it now." "I can see that," he said. She turned her wine glass slowly between her palms. "What about you? Tell me something I cannot read in a Forbes profile." He was quiet for a moment. "I almost quit," he said. "About 12 years ago." He said it easily, without performance or drama. The company was around $300 million. I had everything that externally measures as success, and I woke up one morning and I genuinely could not think of a single reason to get out of bed. He paused. I spent about 6 months being very quietly not okay. She had not expected that either. "What happened?" she asked. "I started building things for reasons that actually meant something to me," he said, "not what would expand the portfolio, what I actually wanted to make." He glanced up. "I bought a neglected coastal resort in Maine. Spent 3 years restoring it. A small team, a lot of it by hand. We opened it with community arts programs built in. Local musicians, local artisans. It barely turns a profit." "And?" she asked. "It is my favorite thing I have ever made," he said. She looked at him across the table. He looked back. "I thought," she said carefully, "that this dinner was going to be difficult." "Is it not?" "It is." She stopped. "It is not what I expected. What did you expect?" "A man who had spent 26 years winning," she said. "Trying to win this too." Something passed between them. It did not have a clean name, a recognition maybe, a kind of settling. "I have spent 26 years, Grant said, becoming someone I think you might actually like." He did not say it as a declaration. He said it quietly, like an admission he had been carrying for a while. "That probably sounds—" "Don't." Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Don't tell me it sounds ridiculous, because it doesn't." The food arrived. They talked for 3 hours. He walked her to her car. The night had turned cold. That clean Portland cold with rain somewhere in the distance, not yet arriving but making itself known in the air. Their breath fogged lightly. She found her keys, turned to face him. "Thank you," she said. "For dinner. Thank you for coming." He was close enough that she could see the specific gris's temples, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes that had not been there when she knew him before. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek with one finger. Just one finger. Not romantic in the way of performance, just gentle. The gesture of someone who was not pretending to be anything. "I would like to see you again," he said. She held his gaze. "I am on this project for 8 months," she said. "We are going to be working together. I know. That is a complication. I am aware. And you still, I have wanted to see you again for 26 years, he said simply. 8 months of professional complication is not the part that concerns me." She unlocked her car, got in. He stepped back, gave her room. She rolled down the window. "I'm not the girl who ran," she said. He nodded. "I know," he said. For the second time that night. "I told you, I'm not interested in her." She drove home. She sat in the parked car in her building's garage for 11 minutes. Just sat there, the engine off, the garage quiet around her. Breathing, letting it be real. I deserved better than what I settled for, she thought, and I was the one who had to learn to believe that. The contract started on a Wednesday. She arrived at the Callaway Grand at 8 in the morning with her site assessment team. Morgan, her project manager, who had been with her for 4 years and could read a structural drawing faster than most architects. Dennis, her structural consultant, who had the quiet confidence of a man who had seen every possible way a building could surprise you. Sandra, the hotel's operations director, met them in the lobby. She had hard hats and confidentiality agreements and a no-nonsense handshake. She walked them through the 4 floors designated for renovation with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this many times. Grant was not there. This was professional and correct and entirely appropriate. Claire was absolutely not registering his absence the way she would have at 21. She was registering it the way a 47-year-old woman with considerable sense registers things, which was also quite intensely, if she was being honest, but in a more composed way, a way with better posture. They spent 6 hours on site. The work was genuinely, engrossingly interesting. The Callaway Grand was a 1920s building, brick and old timber bones. Someone in 1923 had built this place with extraordinary care and vision. And then, over the decades, every subsequent renovation team had made decisions driven by budget and trend, and the particular blindness of people who could not see what was already there. The original architecture had been layered over like good intentions buried under bad ones. Getting back to what the building actually was, that was the project. That was the work. That was exactly the kind of problem she found most compelling. She was standing in the middle of what would become the renovated second floor lobby, marking up her assessment sheet, when she heard footsteps behind her. She knew before she turned, he was in dark slacks and an open collar. No jacket. He looked like the building in some way she could not entirely explain. Like he had always belonged inside these walls. "How bad is it?" he asked. He was looking up at the dropped ceiling with the specific expression of someone who already suspected the answer. "There is 1920s pressed tin up there," she said, "under 3 layers of renovation decisions. Your team in the 90s covered it." He winced. "The bones are exceptional," she said. "Someone in 1923 had real vision. This building deserves to look like itself again." He was quiet for a moment. "That is exactly what I wanted to hear," he said. They stood in the gutted space together. Morgan was across the room with her measuring tape. Dennis had gone to the stairwell. The afternoon light came through the tall, partially covered windows in long, dusty beams. The building smelled of old plaster and sawdust and possibility. She had always loved that smell. "I want to show you something," Grant said. She followed him up 1 floor, down a corridor, to a door at the far end that she had not yet accessed. He unlocked it. It was a corner room, untouched apparently by every renovation decision that had buried the rest of the building. The original plaster walls were intact, the original dark wood trim. A fireplace with original tiles, small geometric shapes in deep blue and cream, entirely intact. A large window looking out over the Portland skyline. She stepped inside. She stood in the center of the room and turned slowly. "This is the owner's suite," he said from the doorway. "I have not touched it. I wanted whoever I brought in to see it first." She looked at the window, the tile, the carved mantelpiece with its original rosette detail. "This is why I do this," she said softly. He was leaning in the doorway. "I know," he said. "I read the article, the one where you talked about why you got into preservation work, the piece from last spring." She turned. "You read that article. I have read most things with your name on them." The room was very quiet. "Grant, I am not trying to make this complicated," he said. He read her tone precisely, the way he had always read her. "I am just being honest about the fact that I paid attention, because I never stopped." She looked at him for a moment. She started. "A lot?" "I know. I was going to say honest," she said. He looked slightly surprised. She liked that. She liked that she could still land something unexpected on him. That evening, she met Donna for wine. Donna arrived with a good bottle and one look at Claire's face. "The complication," she said, "has complicated." He read the article, Claire said. "Which article?" "The design preservation piece, from last spring. The 4,000-word one." Donna poured without being asked. "Okay. That is all you have to say?" "What do you want me to say, Claire?" Donna sat down across from her and tucked her feet up the way she had done since they were 19 years old. "The man has been keeping track of you, quietly, without making it your problem." "For how long?" "He said most things. Most things with your name on them." Donna turned her wine glass. "That is either the most romantic thing I have ever heard or the beginning of a true crime documentary. I cannot fully decide." "Donna, I am mostly kidding." She wasn't entirely. And they both knew it. Claire appreciated that she named the shape of it. The shape of the risk. What does it feel like? When you're with him? Claire leaned her head back against the sofa cushion. "It feels," she said slowly, "like being looked at by someone who is seeing the actual me. Not the version I have been performing. For a very long time. Is that good or terrifying?" "Both," she said. "And I don't entirely trust it. Because the last time I felt like that I was 21 years old and the feeling was so overwhelming I panicked and ran." "You are not 21. "No." She looked at the wine in her glass. "But the feeling is the same. And the part of me that knows that feeling the part that got built over all the years since that part is asking questions." "Like what?" "Like, why now?" "I finally have the first genuinely stable, genuinely mine life I have ever had. Why is this the moment something this large walks back in?" Donna was quiet for a moment. "Or," she said finally, "the question is, what if this is the moment precisely because you are finally ready? Because you built the stable life first? Because the 21-year-old who ran didn't have anything solid to come back, and now you do." Outside, rain started, quiet against the windows of Claire's apartment. The cat settled on the far cushion. The apartment smelled of the good candle Donna had brought last time she visited. Starting over felt impossible, Claire thought. But staying in the same careful place feels worse. She thought about the corner room, the pressed tin ceiling, The original tile fireplace still intact beneath everything that had tried to cover it. Things that looked like ruins, she thought. That turned out to be foundations. The text came on a Thursday morning. She was making coffee. The light was thin, and the morning was cold, and she had a 9 o'clock contractor walkthrough that she needed to be sharp for. She picked up her phone, expecting a calendar reminder. The number was unfamiliar. The message was not long. You should know he was engaged until 8 months ago. A woman named Vivienne. The breakup was not clean. I thought you deserved accurate information before you get any more involved. Claire read it 3 times. No name, no signature, no explanation of who was sending it, or why, or what they expected her to do with the information. Just that. She set the phone down on the kitchen counter and looked at it. The coffee maker finished and beeped, and she did not move. 3 questions arrived at the same time. Who sent this? Why they sent it? And why? With a sinking clarity that settled in her chest like something cold, Grant had not mentioned any of this himself. She did not ask him directly, not yet. She filed the information in the careful, methodical way she had learned to file things. Put it in a drawer in the back of her mind, let the workday happen around it. The contractor walked through at 9. A structural question with Dennis at 10:30 about the south wall on the 3rd floor. 15 minutes of lunch at her desk. The afternoon was tile sourcing and a lengthy phone call with a supplier about the copper plumbing specifications. Grant appeared in the doorway of the temporary site office at 4. Good day? He asked. Productive. She was entering notes on her laptop. She kept her eyes on the screen. I have a question. All right. She turned to face him. She had learned, slowly and at some cost, to be direct. She had been very undirect for a long time before that. It had cost her things she was still occasionally discovering. Someone texted me yesterday, she said. Did not identify themselves. Said I should know you were engaged until 8 months ago. That the breakup was not clean. He went very still, that stillness. The river before it drops. He pulled out the chair across from her, sat down, looked at his hands for a moment, then looked at her. Who texted you? He asked. No name. He nodded slowly. Her name is Vivienne Chase, he said. We were together for 3 years. Engaged for 1 year. The engagement ended last October. He paused. I should have told you at dinner. Yes, she said. I know. His voice was level. I did not because I was afraid of how it would look, which was not honest. I apologize. She studied him. What happened? She asked. He was quiet. She is a brilliant person, he said finally. Successful. Driven. We worked well together in the way that things work on paper when you've selected them logically. But somewhere in the 2nd year, I understood that I had built the relationship the way I used to build companies. Strategically. Looking at external compatibility rather than something more essential. He paused again. She deserved more than that. And she understood it before I was willing to admit it. Who ended it? Claire asked. Officially mutual. In reality, she did. She sat across from me at dinner and said, You are not here. You have never really been here. I think you are in love with a memory, and I am not going to be the person you settle for because of it. The room held that. A memory, Claire said. He met her eyes. Yes, she sat with the weight of it. Not just the compliment embedded inside it. The full weight. That she had been the ghost in his life the same way he had been the ghost in hers. That they had both been haunted by the same absence. Had built entire lives in the long shadow of one decision made at 21. It should have been purely romantic. It was also frightening, because ghosts and real people were different things. I need you to understand something, she said. Her voice was calm. Not angry, not wounded, just clear. I am not a memory. I am not a lost thing that has been recovered. I am a whole, current, complicated person. If you want to get to know me, the actual me that exists right now, that is a completely different project than finding the one who got away. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, settled. I know, he said. Different from the other times he had said it, this time it carried something new, a humility, a recognition of something he had not fully reckoned with until this moment. Then tell me the rest, she said, if there is more, he told her. Vivienne Chase had not taken the breakup quietly. She was formidable and hurt and had made her displeasure known in the precise surgical ways that very powerful, very intelligent women know how to make displeasure known. She ran a competing hospitality firm. She had relationships with several vendors in Grant's network. She had been publicly visible with someone new within 60 days. And she apparently still had the personal number of his assistant. That is who texted me, Claire said. Almost certainly. She is warning me off. She is protecting a narrative, he said. She is very skilled at protecting narratives. Claire turned this over. The anonymous text, the careful phrasing. I thought you deserved accurate information, not a threat, an insinuation, designed to make her feel like the last to know. Like a woman being managed by forces she couldn't see. She recognized that feeling. She had lived inside that feeling for years. Derek reassuring her for 3 years that everything was fine. A whole architecture of smooth reassurances with the texture of truth and none of the content. She was not going to accept smooth reassurances. Not again. Not from anyone. I need to be able to ask you things and get straight answers, she said. Not because I am demanding access to your entire history in the first weeks, but because I cannot do gaps anymore. I learned what gaps cost. Understood. No hesitation. And if she contacts me again, tell me. I will handle it myself, Claire said. I just need to know you are not hiding things. I am not hiding things. Then we are okay, she said. For now. He looked at her, that quiet intensity. She was beginning to relearn it, what it meant and what it was not. For now, he said, and something moved in his eyes that was almost amusement. That is honestly the best I have heard in a while. She called Ashley that night. Ashley was between classes. She was eating something that crinkled. The crackers she had found at the market near her apartment in Florence, and declared the best crackers in human history. Mom, you're calling 2 nights in a row? I am allowed. You are always allowed. You are the mom. More crunching. What happened? I found out something about him he had not told me, and I confronted him about it. A pause in the crunching. And? He was completely honest. No spinning, no managing, just the truth. That is good though, right? Yes, it is. She paused, but it is also frightening because when someone is just honest, no performance, no careful management, then you have to decide what to do with the truth. You cannot argue with it. You just have to choose. Choose what? Claire sat by her window, Portland in the evening rain. Whether I am brave enough, she said. Ashley was quiet. Mom, she said finally. Yeah, you built a company from nothing, after Dad. You raised me by yourself. You are brave enough for dinner. 6 weeks into the renovation. She knew the building now, its rhythms, its moods, its particular sounds. The way light moved through the upper floors in the late afternoon, gold and traveling, touching different walls as the hours changed. The creak of the third-floor corridor at the corner turn, a deep wooden sound like the building settling into itself. The small tick of the original radiators at 7 in the morning, the building talking to itself in the cold. She also knew things about Grant Calloway that Forbes had never covered. He made his own coffee still. Too strong. In mugs slightly too large for a normal hand. He read actual physical books, dog-eared and marked in pencil in the margins. He had a complicated and loving relationship with his older brother Carter, who had stayed in their small hometown in western Pennsylvania and built a smaller, quieter life that Grant respected and did not entirely understand. He disliked the theater of being very rich in a specific, articulate way, not embarrassed by success, allergic to the performance of it. He had called her every evening for the past 12 nights, just to talk, not about the project, about everything else. This was the part getting complicated, not in the messy way she had anticipated. In the way things get complicated when they become real. When you stop thinking about someone as a risk or a decision or a question, and start thinking about them as a person you look forward to talking to. Vivian Chase arrived on a Tuesday. Claire was reviewing tile samples in the first-floor ballroom. The samples were laid out across a work table. Aged cream, warm ivory, a deep celadon that would have been perfect but did not match the archival records. She was leaning over the table with her reading glasses on when she heard footsteps. The sound of heels with intention behind them. She looked up. The woman crossing the ballroom toward her was, objectively, extraordinary. Late 40s, tall, the kind of considered beauty that was the result of either exceptional genetics or extraordinary discipline, and with this woman it was genuinely impossible to determine which. A camel coat, perfectly cut. A leather portfolio under one arm. An expression that had decided to be pleasant as a strategic choice. Claire Hartwell, the woman said. She extended a hand. I am Vivian Chase. Chase Hospitality. Claire took the hand. Her grip was firm. Vivienne, she said, I know who you are. Vivian's small smile acknowledged this without making anything of it. I thought we should meet, she said. We share some professional circles, and I hoped we might speak honestly. About? Vivian looked around the ballroom, at the tile samples, at the scaffolding on the far wall where the original plasterwork was being uncovered. Something moved across her face, something genuine. You are doing beautiful work here, she said. The vision for the pressed tin restoration. I saw the preliminary plans. She paused. That kind of work, you don't find it often. No, Claire said carefully. You don't. Vivian turned back to her. I am not here to make your life difficult, she said. And she said it so directly that it landed as either complete honesty or an extraordinarily good opening move. I sent you that text. You have probably already worked out that it was me. I suspected. I want to explain why. She paused. Grant is not a bad man. I want to say that clearly because I understand what the phrase ex-fiancé tends to imply. He is a genuinely good man with one specific limitation. Another pause. He has been waiting for you for a very long time. Which means that every woman who came after you, every woman who tried to build something real with him, was always competing with something she could not see. Claire did not move. The ballroom was quiet except for the distant sounds of work on the floors above, the muffled thud of something being moved, the faint rhythm of someone using a drill. That is not a comfortable position, Vivian continued. Loving someone who is partially somewhere else. Looking at his face when he is quiet and not performing and knowing clearly that he is thinking about someone you cannot reach. She looked at Claire steadily. I am not telling you this to hurt you or to manipulate you into a particular decision, she said. I am telling you because you deserve to understand what you are walking into. He will love you completely. I believe that with absolute certainty. But the way he loves it is entirely all in, completely. And that can be extraordinary. She held Claire's gaze, or it can be an enormous amount of pressure on another person to be the thing that finally makes the story make sense. The ballroom held everything she had just said. Claire stood in the middle of a room she was in the process of returning to its original self. She thought about Derek, who had loved her at a careful, comfortable distance for 17 years, and how that distance had eventually been filled by someone else, quietly, without her noticing until it was already done. She thought about the corner room upstairs, the original tile fireplace. She thought about what Vivian had just given her, which was not quite a warning, was something more useful and more rare than a warning, was the truth from the inside. Why are you actually telling me this? Claire asked. If you are honest. Vivian looked at her for a long moment. Because, she said slowly, when Grant ended our engagement, I was furious for about 4 months. And then I was just sad for him, because I finally understood that he had been carrying something for a very long time that he could not set down, no matter what he tried to build. She smoothed the front of her coat, and I think he might be able to set it down now. And if he can, the person who walks through that with him is going to have something I never had. She paused. I do not say that easily. I know, Claire said. She meant it completely. Vivian nodded once. Something passed between them. Not warmth exactly, something more specific. The recognition of two women who had been through things, who had come out the other side with enough of themselves intact to be honest in a room where dishonesty would have been much easier. I will get out of your way, Vivian said. She walked back across the ballroom the way she had come, the sound of those heels on the original oak floor receding, then silence. Claire stood alone in the ballroom she was bringing back to life. She took a long, slow breath, let it out. She looked at the ceiling, at the scaffolding, at the bones of what this room had once been and was becoming again. I'm not crazy, she thought. I know exactly what I walked into. And she did. And she was choosing to walk in anyway. She told Grant about the conversation that evening. He listened without interrupting. She watched his expression move through several things. When she finished, he said, Are you all right? Yes. She paused. Were you carrying it the way she said, all those years? He was quiet. Yes, he said, I was. He looked at her. Is that it is honest, she said. That is what it is. And I am not going to be your resolution, she said carefully. I need to say that clearly. I am not the answer to 26 years of something incomplete. I am a person. If what you want is a person, the actual current complicated person in front of you, then I am interested. But if what you want is to finish an old story, I am not available for that role. He was quiet for a moment. Then let me ask you something, he said. Go ahead. What do you want? Not what you are afraid of. Not what makes logical sense. What do you actually want? She was quiet. Portland outside her window. Rain again, the way it always came back. I want, she said very slowly, to see what happens if I do not run. 3 months in. The renovation was taking shape in the way good projects do. Slowly, and then suddenly, whole floors still in controlled chaos on Monday, and then by Friday you walked into a room you had last seen as bare plaster and bare timber, and something had happened. The room had become itself. Real. Arrived. She came in early on those mornings just to stand in the rooms before anyone else arrived. She was also, quietly and without any grand announcement or realization, becoming happy. Not surface happy. Not the managed contentment of a life assembled carefully from reliable parts. The other kind. The kind that lives below everything else and shows up unexpectedly. Walking to her car in the evening. Eating breakfast on a Saturday. In the middle of a meeting when she said something that made everyone in the room laugh, and she felt the warmth of it all the way through. The kind of happy that felt like running on something clean. She noticed it because she had been without it long enough to recognize its absence in retrospect. This was the particular cruelty and particular gift of being 47. Grant came to Portland on Thursdays now, sometimes for legitimate reasons. The renovation always provided something. A decision that required his input. A contractor question that would benefit from his presence. But sometimes there was no meeting scheduled. He came because it was Thursday, and she was here. They had a routine now. Dinner at Orchard Table became dinner wherever the week felt like going. The fish place on the waterfront that she loved, where the oysters came cold and the wine came cold, and the view was the gray-green river doing what it always did. The Vietnamese restaurant a few blocks from her office that he had found and she had never tried, where the pho was the best thing she had eaten all year. One long Thursday afternoon, when the weather broke, and neither of them had the right reason to stop the conversation, they walked along the river for 2 hours and let the day close around them. She had stopped thinking about it as a decision. It had become a thing. It had become, quietly and without ceremony, the thing she looked forward to most. 3 months in was also when she stopped telling herself it was complicated. It was complicated. Of course it was. He lived in New York. Her life was here. Her company was here. Her roots, her routines, her carefully and lovingly constructed Portland life. He had a company that existed in 8 cities at once and required him in ways that were real and constant. These were navigable obstacles. Not small ones, but navigable. What she noticed was that she had stopped using them as reasons to exit. They were just part of the map. And she was reading the map. "You look different," Donna said. Sunday morning in Claire's kitchen. The comfortable Sunday of 2 women with enough history to be quiet in the same space without it meaning anything except ease. Donna was making eggs. Claire was at the counter with a book she had read the same page of 3 times. She looked up. Different how? Less like you are bracing for something. Claire considered that. "I have been bracing for something for a while," she said. "Since Derek, maybe before." Donna set 2 plates on the counter and sat across from her. "You have had this quality. Like you are always prepared for the floor to drop." A readiness. "The floor dropped," Claire said. "It seemed rational to be ready. The floor dropped and you fixed it yourself, and then you spent the next 3 years living as though it might drop again at any moment." Donna picked up her fork, which is exhausting and understandable. And also it seems something that has maybe started to ease. Claire looked at her eggs. "He asked me to come to Maine," she said. "The coastal resort. The one he said is his favorite thing he has ever built. He wants to show it to me." Donna watched her. "And?" "I said yes. Of course you did. I am going next weekend." "Of course you are." Donna. Claire looked up. "Am I making a mistake I cannot see? Is there a version of this where it all falls apart in a way I am going to—" "Yes," Donna said simply. "There is always that version. For anything worth doing." She picked up her fork. "The question is whether the possibility of that fall is worth the thing you would be giving up if you never tried." The cat walked across the kitchen floor and headbutted Claire's ankle under the counter with his characteristic blend of affection and irritation. She reached down and put her hand on his warm orange back. The Sunday continued. Ordinary and full. Maine in November, iron gray sky, salt cold air. The particular beauty of a coast in the off-season, stripped of summer performance, just itself. She arrived on a Friday afternoon. Grant met her at the small regional airport in a truck, not a car, a truck mud-spattered and practical, and drove her along the coastal road while the sky did the thing November skies do in Maine. Turned the light low and serious and completely beautiful. The resort appeared around a bend in the road. She understood it immediately. A collection of converted sea captains' homes and a central lodge, all wood and old stone, set against the water with a kind of permanent deliberateness. Not grand, not performing grandeur, just right. Like it had always been there. Like it had been waiting for someone to remember it was there. "Grant," she said. She was looking through the windshield. "Come see inside," he said. The common room had a fireplace large enough to stand inside. Ceramics on the mantel made by a local artist, he told her. The rugs were handmade. The furniture was old and honest and had been refinished rather than replaced, showing every year of use as a record rather than something to hide. The whole place had the quality of something that had been cared for by someone who understood what care actually required. It looked, she thought, like him. The arts programs are in the converted carriage house, he said. There is a printmaking studio, a recording space for the local music collective. In summer, there are workshops nearly every week. She walked to the large window that looked out over the water. The ocean was that hard November color, gray-green and serious. Gulls moved in arcs against the low sky. The light was the specific northern winter light that made everything look like it was being seen for the first time. She started crying, not with drama, not with sound, just tears, quiet and without any announcement. Grant appeared beside her. He did not touch her. He stood next to her and looked at the water with her. I was not expecting that, she managed. What? To understand so quickly why you love it. He was quiet. It is not really about the building, she said. No, he said. It is about what happens inside it. Yes. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. This would have mortified her at 21. At 47, it was just real. Just the honest response of a person to something genuinely moving. This is who you are, she said. This is the version of you that does not appear in any profile. Yes, he said. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with that quiet, patient expression, the one she had finally, definitively stopped misreading. It had never been indifference. It had never even been restraint in the way she thought. It was simply love, held carefully, offered without demand or performance, the rarest possible form of it. She took a step toward him. He held still. She put her hand against his chest. He covered it with his. Neither of them said anything. The ocean moved outside the glass. The fire crackled in the large fireplace. The whole world outside was cold and gray and beautiful. They walked the shoreline for an hour after, cold and alive, the wind off the water direct and salt-sharp. Her collar turned up, his hand in hers when the path narrowed. I need to tell you something, she said, near the far end of the beach where the path turned back. All right. I love Derek, she said. I want to say that, because I think there is a version of the past several months where I have been too quick to rewrite that whole chapter. He was a good man in many ways. I was genuinely in that marriage for most of it. It was not a placeholder. It was real. Grant listened without interrupting. But she stopped walking. The water was very close. A wave came in slow and retreated, leaving dark, wet sand. I chose him partly because choosing him felt manageable, because I had already run from the thing that felt too large. And I think I was never going to choose something that felt too large again. She looked at the ocean. You feel too large, she said. I know, he said. I am not running this time. She turned to face him. I want to be clear about that. I am not running. But I am also not pretending the size of it does not frighten me. He looked at her. I have been afraid too, he said. Every day since the elevator. Because what if I am too late? What if I spent 26 years keeping track of someone from a careful distance, and the actual person, the real current, complicated Claire, doesn't want what I have to offer? That is honest, she said. You asked me to be. She looked at the ocean, back at him. I want what you have to offer, she said quietly. He let out a long breath. There was no music. The ocean made its cold, unhurried sounds. The gulls called down the shore. The wind moved through the sparse November grass above the tide line. Two people in the middle of their lives, choosing carefully and with full awareness of what choosing cost, to walk towards something instead of away. December, 5 months into the renovation. Ahead of schedule in the ways that mattered. Messily behind in the ways renovations are always messily behind. The original copper plumbing on the 6th floor had required re-specification. The 3rd floor south wall had revealed structural supports no one's drawings had accounted for, requiring Dennis to re-engineer the entire window plan. The tile manufacturer had pushed the ballroom delivery by 3 weeks. She had navigated all of it. She was very good at navigating things. The thing she had not yet navigated was telling Ashley the full weight of what was happening. Ashley had known something was happening. She was 22 and perceptive, and her mother's daughter in all the best and most inconvenient ways. But there was a significant difference between Mom has been seeing someone and Mom has been seriously, irreversibly, frighteningly falling for the billionaire she left at 21, who apparently spent the intervening 26 years keeping quiet track of her from a careful distance, and who now seems to be, quietly and surely, the primary gravitational force in her life. Ashley came home for the holidays. She arrived at PDX with 3 bags, 1 enormous portfolio case, paint under her fingernails from the transatlantic flight, and the specific bright-eyed exhaustion of someone doing important creative work. Claire met her at the terminal. They hugged the way they always hugged. Arms completely around each other. Ashley's chin on Claire's shoulder because she was 3 inches taller, which still caught Claire off guard every single time. You look, Ashley pulled back and looked directly at her mother's face. I know, Claire said. Good, Mom. You look so good. Ashley picked up her bag. Now, tell me everything. So Claire did. Ashley listened the way she had always listened, with her whole body, turned toward her mother in the passenger seat. Watching Claire's face the way she had watched it since she was 3 years old and trying to understand the world through the map of her mother's expressions. When Claire finished, Ashley was quiet. Then she said, You are in love with him. Not a question. I think Claire started. Mom. Claire drove. Yes, she said. Ashley exhaled. It was not quite a laugh. It had more weight than that. Does he know? I have not said it. Does he love you? I believe he does. Claire paused. He shows up. Completely. Every time. Another pause. Your father showed up completely at first, too. I want to be careful about letting the feeling tell the entire story. Ashley looked at the road ahead. He is different than Dad, she said, not as a defense of Derek, just as an observation, an honest one. Very, Claire said. Is the difference the right kind or the frightening kind? Claire thought about Maine, the ocean, his hand covering hers. Both, she said, and I am staying anyway. Ashley nodded slowly. I want to meet him, she said. I know, not because I need to approve. I know that, Claire said. She glanced at her daughter. You can trust me to know my own heart, Ash. Ashley was quiet. I know, she said. I have just watched you be careful for so long. Her voice softened in the way it did when she was saying something she had been holding for a while. I want someone to see you the way you deserve to be seen, the way I see you. Claire's throat did something complicated. He does, she said. The strange thing was how completely she believed it. They had dinner the following Saturday. Grant, Ashley, Claire. She had been quietly, privately nervous in a way she was not going to mention out loud to anyone, including herself. Ashley was her entire world compressed into one person, sharp and kind and direct and opinionated, in the way of someone who had inherited the best qualities of both her parents and none of the worst ones. Meeting people Ashley was forming opinions about was one of the very few things that still made Claire's hands feel unsteady. Grant arrived with flowers. Not roses, not performance. Wildflowers in a loose, tall, unfussy arrangement that looked like something you might bring to someone's house because you happened to walk past a good florist and thought of them. He shook Ashley's hand and said, I have heard a lot about you. Ashley said, I have heard everything about you. Grant glanced at Claire. Claire gave him nothing. He looked back at Ashley. Fair enough, he said. Ashley studied him for exactly 4 seconds. The forensic 4 seconds she applied to everything she found genuinely interesting. You are not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? Moorshine. The Forbes thing. The entire building named after you. She considered him. You just seem like a person. I am a person, he said, who has been required on occasion to perform the shine. Did you like it? No. Ashley looked at her mother. I see it, she said quietly. Claire's chest felt full in the way it did only around the people she loved most. Dinner lasted 3 hours. Ashley asked about the main resort, and Grant talked about it with a complete absence of performance. He mentioned specific names: the young woman who ran the printmaking studio, who had moved to town from Portland 6 years ago, and built something extraordinary in the carriage house. The elderly fisherman, retired now, who had walked in one afternoon out of curiosity and become the most sought-after woodworking teacher they had. At the end of dinner, while Claire was in the restroom, Ashley turned to Grant. He told her about it later that night. Ashley had said, My mother built everything she has herself? After a lot of things did not go the way she deserved. I need you to understand that. And Grant had said, I know. I have been watching her build for a while. And Ashley had looked at him for a long moment, then said, Then make sure you are worth what she is risking. Claire called Donna after Ashley had gone to bed. How did it go? She told him to make sure he was worth what I am risking. A pause. That, Donna said, is my girl. She is my girl. She is both of ours. I have been her emergency aunt since she was 7. Donna paused. But what do you think? After tonight. After all of it. What do you actually think? Claire sat on her sofa. Bruiser had settled on the cushion beside her. She rested her hand on his warm orange back, and he permitted this, as always, with his resigned and slightly judgmental grace. I think, she said slowly, that I spent a very long time believing that what I wanted was either too much or too late. And now? And somewhere in the past 5 months, I stopped believing that. The room was warm. The night was quiet outside. The rain had stopped, and the city was doing that thing it did after rain, when everything smelled clean and the wet streets reflected the lights in long orange lines. I'm not waiting for the floor to drop anymore, she said. Donna exhaled. Good, she said quietly. It is about time, January, a Monday. Cold? Clear? The kind of January morning that was honest about what it was. She was in the 6th floor corridor, reviewing the final copper plumbing assessment with her contractor when her phone rang. Derek, she let it go to voicemail. He called again 4 minutes later. She stepped away from the contractor, walked to the window at the end of the corridor. The city was gray and bright at once below her. Derek, she said, I need to talk to you. His voice had the quality it always got when he had been working up to something for a while. Careful, rehearsed. The voice of someone who had decided to say a thing and was now committed to it. All right, Ashley mentioned. She said you are seeing someone. Yes. Is it serious? She looked at the January city, the bare trees, the river catching light. Yes, she said. He was quiet. Claire Derrick. Her voice was level. Not unkind, but not pretending they were anything other than what they were either. What did you want to say? I wanted he stopped. I know I was not always present, toward the end of the marriage. I know I checked out in ways that were not fair to you, ways that hurt you. I have been working on understanding that, in therapy. Good, she said. She meant it. She genuinely meant it. I guess I always thought, he paused. I don't know what I thought, honestly. When Ashley said serious, I realized I had always somehow assumed you would. Wait, she said. She said it gently. That is not, but he did not finish the denial. I did not wait, she said. I built something. I am still building it. Silence. Are you happy, he asked. And it was, she recognized with a small surprise, one of the most genuinely honest things he had ever asked her. No strategy behind it, not angling toward anything. Just a man who had made real mistakes asking a real question. Yes, she said. Genuinely, yes, he exhaled. Then I am glad, he said, and she believed him, because Derek, whatever his failures, and there had been significant ones, had always cared about her happiness. In the imprecise way of someone who did not always know how to act on caring. But the caring had been real. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, Claire. She hung up, stood at the window. She had been carrying the anticipatory weight of that conversation for a long time, had told herself it would be complicated, painful, would require careful management. But she just felt clean, like a room open to the air after a long winter. She had dinner with Grant that evening. She told him about Derek's call. He listened all the way through before he said anything. How do you feel? He asked. Clear, she said, like everything has found its proper place. He poured more wine. She looked at him across the table. I need to tell you something, she said. All right, I love you. He went completely still. She kept her eyes on his. Not the you from 26 years ago. Not the resolution to an old story. You. She paused. The man who reads books until they fall apart and makes coffee that no one else can drink and built something in Maine with his own hands because this was the thing that actually meant something. The man who was honest with me when it would have been much easier not to be. The man who stood in a doorway in Maine and held my hand and did not need it to be anything other than what it was. His expression moved through several things. He reached across the table, covered her hand with his. I have loved you, he said quietly, for 26 years. And I have loved who you have become for 5 months. He paused. And the second is so much more extraordinary than the first. She looked at their hands. The restaurant moved around them. Voices. The soft collision of a living world. She was 47 years old. She had rebuilt herself from the inside out. She had walked back into the thing that had once terrified her, found it exactly as large as she remembered, and different in every way that actually mattered. Different because she was different. New York and Portland, she said, I know. That is a real thing to navigate, I know. He turned her hand over, held it properly. I have also been thinking about the fact that I built a regional development division in Portland. Last fall. Required my direct oversight. She looked at him. You did not. I absolutely did. Grant, the hotel renovation was genuine coincidence, he said. Everything after that, he paused. I make decisions when I know what I want. She laughed. It came out surprised and real and not at all controlled, and she did not care at all. You built an entire division, she said. Regional development. Very logical. Strong market fundamentals. You are impossible. I prefer decisive. Those are the same thing at your income level. He laughed too. And it was, honestly, the best sound in the room. She called Ashley that night, Mom. Ashley picked up immediately. You're glowing through the phone. I can actually hear it. I told him I love him. A sound from Florence. Pure, uncomplicated, unguarded joy. Mom, I know. And he told me he built a regional division in Portland last fall. Dead silence. He built an entire division. That is the most Ashley made a sound that was equal parts disbelief and delight. That is the most aggressively romantic and also slightly unhinged thing I have ever heard in my entire life. I know. Are you okay with it? Claire sat by her window, Portland at night, her city, her life. The life she had built from the rubble of something that had not worked out. The life that was entirely and completely hers. "I am," she said, "because it is not him managing the situation. It is him moving towards something with his entire self, completely in, which is what he has always been." She paused. "I just was not ready for it before." Ashley was quiet. "Are you ready now?" "Yes," Claire said. And for the first time in a very long time, there was nothing underneath the yes. No bracing, no watching the floor. Just the answer. Clean and true and completely her own. Spring. 8 months to the day since she had lunged for an elevator in the Callaway Grand Lobby and found her entire life rearranging itself around what she found inside it. The renovation was complete. She stood in the second-floor lobby on a Tuesday morning, 1 hour before the reopening walkthrough, and looked at what they had made. The pressed tin ceiling was uncovered and restored. Its original geometric pattern, diamonds within diamonds, intricate and perfectly scaled, gleamed silver-white in the April morning light. The walls were back to the original plaster, the color she had mixed 3 separate times until she was satisfied. A particular warm cream. Not too cold, not too yellow. The color the building had always wanted to be. The floors were the original white oak. Refinished but not overfinished. Still showing the marks of decades of use as a history rather than as something to be ashamed of. Every room on 4 floors had been brought back to what it had wanted to be all along. She stood very still in the center of the lobby. She thought about the first time she had walked into this building. The dropped ceilings, the bad wallpaper, the decades of accumulated decisions made by people who could not see what was underneath, who thought covering something was the same as improving it. They had not lost the original building, they had covered it. That was a different thing. Entirely. Grant found her there. He came in from the stairwell. He had been taking the stairs throughout the entire project. She had noticed this early on and never mentioned it, just filed it in the drawer of things she knew about him, and stopped when he saw her standing alone in the lobby. They were the only 2 people in the space. The light came through the restored tall windows and hit the tin ceiling and scattered back in silver. The original floors were warm under the morning light. The whole lobby smelled of beeswax and old wood and something clean. "Well," she said. "Well," he said. He crossed the lobby toward her. They stood side by side and looked up at the ceiling together. "You gave this building itself back," he said. "It was always there," she said. "We just uncovered it." He turned to look at her. She turned to look at him. 8 months ago, she had stood in this lobby breathless, one heel scuffed. 30 minutes from the presentation that would change everything. She had been a woman who was good at managing things, who had learned to keep the stakes calibrated and the expectations reasonable and the floor carefully monitored for any sign of dropping. She was still that woman. She had not become someone different. She had not erased any of it. She had become a fuller version. The careful, capable, methodical part she had built from necessity was still there. It had kept her standing when standing was very hard, and it would keep her standing again when it needed to. But the other part, the part that had gone quiet through a long, careful marriage and a necessary rebuilding and 3 years of deliberately cultivated peace, that part was here too, standing in the light of a restored ceiling, completely, without apology, without holding anything back. "I was so afraid of this," she said quietly. "I know, not just now. At 21, I was afraid of what it felt like to love someone this much. I thought that level of feeling was not safe. Was it safe?" She thought about everything the last 8 months had held, the confrontations and the honest conversations, the hard morning with Vivienne in this very room, the phone call with Derek at the 6th floor window, the dinner with Ashley that had lasted 3 hours, the night in Maine with her hand pressed against his chest, and the ocean outside the glass. "No," she said, "not safe at all." She looked at him. The best kind of not safe. He held her face in both hands, kissed her forehead, her temple, her cheek, unhurried. Like a man who had arrived somewhere he had been intending to be for a very long time and was in absolutely no hurry to leave. She put her arms around him. They stood in the lobby of the Callaway Grand under the restored silver ceiling in the April morning light. She thought about all the things she might tell her 21-year-old self. She had been composing this list without meaning to for months. It came to her in small pieces, in the mornings, on the drives home, in the quiet after the important conversations. Tell her, the thing that frightens you most is usually the thing most worth staying for. Tell her, safe and good are not the same word. Tell her, the floor is sturdier than you think it is. Tell her, The person you will need to become before you can hold something this large she is worth every single year. But also, she would not tell her 21-year-old self anything, because the 21-year-old who ran became the woman who rebuilt. And the woman who rebuilt became someone who could finally stand still, who could hold something enormous without flinching, who could let herself be seen completely, in the full and complicated truth of who she had become, and choose not to run. The long way had been, she was only now fully understanding, the only way. The reopening walkthrough that afternoon was full of people who said exactly the right things. Architectural historians and preservation officers, and a reporter from the design journal who kept using the word meticulous in a way that made Morgan, standing nearby, catch Claire's eye with a suppressed smile. Claire shook hands and answered questions and was fully, professionally present for all of it. At the end of the afternoon, she slipped away to the corner room. Third floor, the owner's suite, the one untouched room, the first thing Grant had ever shown her in this building. She stood in the center of it, the original plaster, the dark wood trim with its carved rosette detail, the fireplace with its deep blue and cream tiles, cleaned and preserved, the large window with its original glass restored, looking out over the city that was her city, the life that was her life. She heard the door. Grant. He leaned in the frame the way he had the very first time he showed her this room. "People are asking for you," he said. "I needed a minute." He came in, stood beside her at the window. "Do you remember what you said the first time you saw this room?" he asked. She remembered it exactly. "This is why I do this," she said quietly. He looked out the window. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the main resort." "What about it?" "The carriage house has a room I have never used for anything. South-facing windows. Good light all day." He paused. "I thought it might make a good studio, for someone who occasionally needs to work from a different location." She turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the window, but she could see the corner of his mouth. "A studio," she said, "for design work. Portfolio reviews, that kind of thing. How very professional. I am a professional. You are absolutely not." He turned to look at her. The late afternoon light came through the old glass and did what good light does in well-made rooms. Made everything slow and warm and completely worth staying inside. "What do you say?" he asked. She looked at the man in front of her. Not the memory, not the unfinished story, not the man in the elevator who said impossible things. The man who read books until they fell apart, who made coffee too strong in cups too large, who built things for the right reasons, who had carried something quietly for 26 years and set it down finally when he found the right place to put it, who was looking at her right now with the expression she had finally, at 47 years of age, completely stopped misreading. "I say yes," she said, later, months later, then years. Because that is how time moves. When you have stopped fighting it, she would try to explain to people who asked how they found each other again. She never quite got it right. The best she ever managed was something like this. You know how a building can get covered over? Layer after layer of bad renovation. Dropped ceilings, wrong wallpaper, everything original buried under everything that came after. And the building looks like nothing, looks ruined. Looks like it has lost everything it ever was. But if you take the time, if you have patience and enough respect for what is underneath, you find that the original bones are perfect. The original vision was always there, always intact. Waiting. You did not build something new, you uncovered something that had been there the whole time. That is what it felt like we were both there all along, just waiting to be uncovered. She thought about this on an October morning the following year, standing at the window of the main lodge. The ocean was that October color, dark and serious and beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they are not trying to be. The sky was low and the color of pewter, and the light was the specific northern autumn light she had come to love. Behind her, Grant was making coffee. She could hear it, the kettle, the particular sounds of a morning that belonged to her, entirely and without apology. A morning that was hers in the way that the best things are finally yours, not because you claimed them, but because you stopped running from them. She thought, I deserved better than what I settled for, and the hardest part was learning to believe I deserved it. She thought, the hardest thing was not leaving the wrong place. The hardest thing was trusting that staying in the right place was allowed. She thought, I am not the girl who ran. And she thought, I am so glad. The coffee appeared on the windowsill beside her, poured into a mug that was slightly too large for a normal hand. She picked it up, held it with both hands the way she always did, felt the warmth of it move through her palms, tasted it. Too strong. Exactly right. Outside, the ocean moved in its old completely indifferent, entirely reliable way. It had been moving like this before either of them existed. It would move like this after. That permanence was not frightening. At this window, in this light, it was the most comforting thing she knew. She heard his footsteps behind her. His hand settled on her shoulder. Warm. Present. That was all. Just that. Just him. Just this morning and this window and this life she had not expected. This life she had been brave enough, finally, to step into when it came. The door, she thought, had been unlocked the whole time. She had simply needed to become someone who knew she was allowed to open it. She had always been allowed. She just had not known it yet.
There is something this story is really about. And it is not the billionaire. It is not the hotel. It is not the elevator, or the pressed tin ceiling, or even the love story itself, as beautiful as all of those things are. This story is about a woman who learned, too slowly and at great cost, the difference between a safe life and a good one. Claire Hartwell did everything right. She was practical at 21 when practical felt like wisdom. She chose the manageable man over the overwhelming one. She built a life. She maintained it. She smoothed the edges and kept the floors braced, and told herself, year after year, that contentment was the same as happiness, that wanting more was something you grew out of, that the enormous feeling she had run from at 21 had been a young woman's foolishness and not, as it turned out, the most honest thing she had ever felt. She was wrong. And here is what this story asks you to sit with. How many of us are doing the same thing? How many of us are living in the careful version of our lives? The managed version. The version we chose not because it was right, but because it felt survivable. Because the right thing, the true thing, felt too large, too risky, too much like standing at the edge of something with no guarantee of where you land. We choose the safe job over the meaningful one. We stay in the relationship that is comfortable instead of pursuing the one that is real. We stop asking for the things we actually want because somewhere along the way, we decided that wanting too much was dangerous. We become very good at pretending the floor might drop. And then we spend our lives bracing for it, even when the floor has been perfectly solid for years. Claire spent 3 years after her divorce rebuilding herself, doing the necessary, important, genuinely hard work of becoming a woman who stood on her own, who built her own company, who raised her daughter and made her own choices, and stopped needing anyone else to define the shape of her life. And only then, only when she had done all of that, was she ready. Not for Grant Calloway specifically, but for the version of herself who could hold something real without flinching, who could be completely seen by another person and not run, who could say, "I love you" out loud without qualifying it or managing it or holding something back in case it was needed later. That is the lesson. You do not find the right love and then become yourself. You become yourself first. And then, if you are lucky and brave and willing to stop running, the right love finds somewhere to land. There is something else this story says quietly, underneath everything else. It says, you are not too late. Not at 47, not at 55, not at 63. The woman who deserves the full, unguarded, completely present life. She does not have an expiration date. The things you want do not expire. The door does not lock behind you just because you have been walking away from it for a long time. You can turn around. You are allowed to turn around. And the most important thing, the thing Claire finally learned, standing at a window in Maine with coffee in a mug that was too large and the ocean doing what the ocean has always done, is this. The door was never locked. It was never locked. You were the one holding yourself outside of it. And the moment you stop, the moment you put down the fear and the practicality and the voice that says, "This is too much. You are too old. You have waited too long." The moment you put all of that down and simply open the door, you find that what you were afraid of losing was already yours. It was waiting. The way the pressed tin ceiling was waiting under the dropped tiles. The way the original floor was waiting under the layers of renovation. The way Grant Calloway was waiting in the back corner of an elevator. Not gone. Just covered. And now, uncovered. Be brave enough to uncover yours. This content was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team with the intention of bringing genuine meaning, honest storytelling, and real-life lessons to every person who listens. We do not use automation to tell these stories. Every word was chosen by a human hand, for a human heart. Because we believe your time is worth that.